Have you ever wondered whether your surname is more than just a family name? Whether hidden inside those few letters is the story of a kingdom, a battlefield, or clan that once shaped the fate of Scotland itself? Most people assume a surname is simply something inherited from their parents. But in the Scottish Highlands, a surname once meant far more than identity. It told others where you came from, who would fight beside you, who would protect you, and in many cases, who considered you their enemy. A single name could open castle gates or summon armed men outside them. It could mean privilege, loyalty, honor, or persecution. And centuries later, millions of people across Britain, Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and beyond still carry these remarkable names without ever realizing the extraordinary stories they represent. Today we're uncovering 10 Scottish surnames whose histories stretch back through royal courts, Highland glens, brutal battles, and acts of courage that change lives forever. By the end, you may discover that your own surname connects you to one of Scotland's most fascinating bloodlines. But stay with us until number 1, because that final surname is connected to an act of loyalty so extraordinary that it nearly erased an entire clan from history. Yet without that sacrifice, one of Scotland's greatest legends might never have survived. Before we begin, if you're fascinated by the true history hidden inside British surnames, forgotten clans, and ancient DNA, make sure you subscribe to UK Bloodlines. Every week, we uncover the hidden history behind the names millions of families still carry today. We begin with a surname whose very existence became a crime. Imagine waking one morning to discover that the name your father gave you, the name carved onto your family's land, had suddenly become illegal. Not because you committed a crime, but because you belonged to a family powerful enough to frighten the crown. That was the reality faced by the McGregors. Their surname comes from the Gaelic MacGregor, son of Greogar, a form of the Latin Gregorius, often translated as the watchful one. Yet history remembers the McGregors, not for quietly watching, but for refusing to submit. During a violent dispute at Glenfruin in 1603, around 80 members of the Colquhoun clan were killed, according to contemporary petitions to the Privy Council. King James VI responded by outlawing the McGregor name itself. Families were ordered to abandon it or face severe punishment. Many adopted names such as Murray, Campbell, or Drummond simply to survive. Others quietly continued using McGregor in secret, passing it from one generation to the next despite the risks. The restrictions remained in place for generations before finally being lifted in the 18th century. Few surnames in European history have experienced such direct suppression. If your surname is McGregor today, it survives not because history was kind to your ancestors, but because ordinary families quietly refused to let their identity disappear. If the McGregors became famous for resisting authority, the next clan became renowned for mastering it. The Campbells are among the most recognized names in Scottish history, and perhaps the most debated. Their surname derives from the Gaelic Cambuel, crooked mouth, an unexpectedly humble beginning for a family that would become one of the most influential powers in the Highlands. Through political alliances, strategic marriages, and careful relationships with successive governments, the Campbells steadily expanded their influence from their stronghold in Argyll. Unlike many clans whose fortunes rose and fell dramatically, they demonstrated an extraordinary ability to adapt. That success, however, earned them lasting enemies. No event shaped their reputation more than the massacre of Glencoe in 1692. Picture a freezing February morning. Snow blankets the narrow valley. Families are only just beginning to stir after offering hospitality to government soldiers who had lived among them for nearly 2 weeks. Then, without warning, the men who had shared their food received new orders. The attack begins before dawn. 38 MacDonalds were killed. Many others perished, escaping through the winter mountains. Historians continue to debate the extent of Campbell responsibility, noting the massacre resulted from decisions made by government officials rather than the actions of an entire clan. Yet, in Scottish memory, the event became permanently associated with the Campbell name. To this day, Glencoe remains one of the most emotionally charged episodes in Highland history. Our next surname carries us further back in time, to a family whose story began before Scotland itself fully emerged as a unified kingdom. From the ancient province of Moray came the Murray clan, their name originating from Moirib, the Gaelic for Moray. While every schoolchild learns the name William Wallace, few know that another commander stood beside him at Stirling Bridge in 1297, and that without him, the victory might never have happened. Andrew Murray had already launched a successful uprising in northern Scotland before joining Wallace. Together, they defeated a far larger English force despite overwhelming odds. Then, weeks later, Murray was dead from wounds suffered in the battle. His early death meant Wallace became the enduring national hero, while Murray's name faded from popular memory. Yet historians increasingly recognize him as one of the conflict's finest military leaders. Here is the twist few people expect. The very name Murray, now carried by millions across the English-speaking world, may owe its survival to a man who never lived to see the peace he helped win. Had Andrew Murray survived Stirling Bridge, history might remember a different Scottish hero altogether. Sometimes history remembers only one name, even when two stood together. Not every famous Scottish clan began in Scotland. The Ross surname derives from the Gaelic word for a headland or peninsula, an appropriate name for a clan rooted in the dramatic landscapes of northern Scotland. Yet despite this strong connection to place, many Ross families eventually found themselves forced to leave it behind. Throughout medieval Scotland, the earldom of Ross represented one of the country's most contested titles, drawing competing claims from the MacDonalds, the Stewarts, and the Crown itself. Members of Clan Ross fought in many of Scotland's defining conflicts, from Bannockburn to Flodden, and later during the Jacobite period. But perhaps the greatest turning point came not on a battlefield, but during the Highland Clearances of the 18th and 19th centuries. Picture smoke rising from cottages your grandparents built. Sheep replaced neighbors. The hills remain exactly as they always have, but the people who gave those hills their memories are gone. While the experiences of the clearances varied greatly across different regions, many Highland families endured profound hardship. Thousands emigrated to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, carrying little more than their language, traditions, and surnames. For Ross families today, the journey across the world likely began not as an adventure, but as a necessity. What kind of family leaves behind not a kingdom nor a crown, but a building that still puzzles visitors more than 500 years after its completion? Step inside Rosslyn Chapel, just south of Edinburgh, and every surface seems alive with carvings, angels, vines, musicians, biblical scenes, mysterious faces, and symbols whose meanings remain debated even today. Behind it stood the Sinclair family, whose surname traces back to St. Clair in Normandy before they established themselves in Scotland during the 12th century. Over generations, the Sinclairs became Earls of Caithness and prominent figures in northern Scotland, and they held an important ceremonial role within Scottish Freemasonry for centuries, a connection that has fed much of the speculation surrounding the chapel. But here is the twist that nearly everyone misses. Rosslyn's carvings include one feature that should not, by any reasonable measure, be there: ears of maize, a crop unknown in Europe before Columbus returned from the Americas, carved into stone years before the voyages that supposedly brought such knowledge across the Atlantic. Whether coincidence, prophecy, or evidence of an earlier crossing, no one has ever explained it to general satisfaction, though most historians urge caution, noting that the carvings are difficult to date precisely and that decorative motifs are often overinterpreted by enthusiasts eager for a mystery. The Sinclairs left behind not simply castles or battlefields, but one of Europe's greatest historical puzzles. By the late Middle Ages, few clans could rival the influence once held by the MacDonalds. Their surname, MacDonald, means son of Domhnall, a name often interpreted as world ruler. It was an ambitious title, but remarkably, the family came closer than almost any other Highland clan to making that aspiration real. The Lords of the Isles ruled an almost independent maritime kingdom stretching across the Hebrides and much of Scotland's western seaboard, controlling vital sea routes linking Scotland, Ireland, and the Isle of Man. While Scottish kings ruled from the east, the MacDonalds governed much of the west with their own courts, laws, and military forces. For generations, they stood as one of the greatest powers in medieval Britain. Then, in 1493, the lordship of the Isles was forfeited to the Scottish crown, and here is the strangest part of the story. The end of this Gaelic kingdom did not come through a single decisive battle, but through decades of quiet pressure, broken treaties, and shifting loyalties. The MacDonalds were not conquered so much as politically dismantled, one alliance at a time, until the kingdom simply ceased to exist. The clan itself survived, dividing into numerous branches. Some remained influential, while others endured hardship during later conflicts, including the tragedy at Glencoe. Stand on the shore as the longships disappear into the Atlantic for the final time, knowing that your family's kingdom has ended not with a charge, but with a signature. While one family ruled a kingdom without wearing a crown, Another eventually inherited the crown itself. Few surnames are woven into British history as completely as Stewart or Stewart. Originally derived from the Old English stigward, meaning the keeper or steward of a royal household, it began as a title rather than a family name. In 1371, Robert Stewart became Robert II, establishing the Stewart dynasty on the Scottish throne. Over the next several centuries, the family produced monarchs whose decisions shaped not only Scotland but the future of Britain itself, among them Mary, Queen of Scots, and James VI of Scotland, who in 1603 also became James I of England, uniting the crowns forever. But dynasties rarely enjoy uninterrupted success. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 removed the Stuart line from power, setting in motion the Jacobite movement. Across the Highlands, thousands answered that call, some for political conviction, others following ancient clan loyalties. After Culloden in 1746, Parliament introduced measures designed to reduce the military and political power of the Highland clan system, including restrictions on traditional Highland dress. These reforms transformed Highland society forever. To carry the name Stewart or Stewart is to be connected not simply to one clan, but to a royal dynasty whose influence reached every corner of Britain, and whose exile would set the Highlands on fire. Some clans arrived in Scotland from elsewhere and became so deeply woven into its history that few today remember they were ever newcomers at all. The Frasers are the most striking example. Their origins almost certainly lie in Normandy, arriving in Britain after the Norman conquest before establishing themselves in Scotland during the 12th century. The exact origin of the surname remains debated, with some scholars linking it to the French word for strawberry, reflected in the clan's heraldry. Whatever its beginnings, the Fraser family embraced Highland culture with remarkable speed, acquiring lands around Inverness and the Great Glen. Their loyalty during the Jacobite Rising of 1745 proved especially costly. Simon Fraser, Lord Lovat, sometimes called the Old Fox for his political maneuvering, eventually supported the Jacobite cause. After Culloden, he was captured and transported to London, where on 9th April 1747, at 80 years of age, he became the last person in Britain to be executed by beheading on Tower Hill. Government reprisals affected many Highland communities after the uprising, including Fraser territories, where estates were confiscated and traditional clan authority weakened. The Fraser name reminds us that identities evolve across centuries. A family that arrived as Norman outsiders became so deeply Scottish that few today realize the journey began across the English Channel. Before we reveal our final two surnames, take a moment to think about your own family name. Have you recognized it already? Or perhaps you've heard the names of neighbors, grandparents, or old family friends mentioned throughout this documentary. If you're enjoying this journey through Scotland's forgotten clans and bloodlines, we'd love to know where your family comes from. Share your surname and your family's story in the comments. We read everyone, and many inspire future documentaries here on UK Bloodlines. Our final two surnames take us into one of the most turbulent chapters in Scottish history, when loyalty became more dangerous than rebellion itself. By the middle of the 18th century, the Highlands were changing forever. Old alliances were fracturing. Ancient clan rivalries suddenly mattered less than a far greater question. Who would Scotland follow, the Hanoverian government in London or the exiled House of Stewart? It was a question that divided families, split clans, and ultimately reshaped the Highlands for generations. Yet among all the clans who answered, few earned a reputation as formidable as the Camerons. Picture the Western Highlands in the summer of 1745. Morning mist hangs low across Lochaber. The slopes beneath Ben Nevis are silent except for the distant sound of cattle bells. Then a rider appears, carrying astonishing news. Charles Edward Stewart, Bonnie Prince Charlie, has landed in Scotland. The prince believes the Highlands will rise for him once again. Many think the plan hopeless. Others believe it their last chance to restore the Stuart monarchy. Every clan chief now faces an impossible decision: remain loyal to the government and preserve what remains of their lands, or risk everything for a cause that may already be lost. Among the first to answer that call was Donald Cameron of Lochiel, later remembered as the Gentle Lochiel, widely respected not only as a military leader, but as a man whose judgment carried enormous weight. Some historians believe that without Lochiel's support, the Jacobite Rising might never have gained the momentum it did. His decision encouraged thousands of Highlanders to rally behind the prince, transforming what could have been a small uprising into one of the most dramatic campaigns in British history. The Cameron surname comes from the Gaelic Cam Shron, usually translated as crooked nose. Like many Highland surnames, it probably began as a simple physical description before becoming the name of an entire dynasty. Yet history remembers the Camerons for far more than the meaning of their name. Their homeland in Lochaber occupied one of the most strategically important regions of the Western Highlands, and generation after generation defended those glens against rival clans, royal armies, and shifting political alliances. Then came the battles that would define an era: Prestonpans, Falkirk, and finally Culloden. At each stage, Cameron men fought near the front of the Jacobite army. When defeat came on the bleak moor outside Inverness in April 1746, the consequences were devastating. Government forces moved swiftly to prevent any future rebellion. Estates were confiscated, traditional clan authority weakened, and military forts strengthened across key Highland routes. Fort William, standing near Cameron territory, became one visible symbol of that determination. Picture the homecoming after Culloden. The familiar path through the glen is still there. The mountains have not moved, the rivers still flow exactly as they always have, but everything else has changed. Friends who marched beside you will never return. Your chief has fled overseas. Your home stands abandoned. The songs once sung around evening fires become whispers, spoken only when strangers are no longer listening. For many Highland families, the greatest tragedy was not simply military defeat, it was watching an entire way of life slowly disappear. Yet the Camerons endured. Their descendants carried the surname across the Atlantic, into Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and countless other parts of the world. And now we arrive at the final surname. If you've stayed with us this far, you've already traveled through kingdoms, royal dynasties, forgotten heroes, architectural mysteries, and some of Scotland's darkest chapters. But none of those stories quite prepare us for the family whose greatest act of courage happened not on a battlefield, but during one desperate journey across the sea. A decision that would cost them almost everything they possessed, yet preserved one of the most enduring legends in Scottish history. To understand why this family occupies the final place on our list, we have to return once more to the aftermath of Culloden. The Jacobite army has been shattered. Charles Edward Stewart has become the most wanted man in Britain. A reward of £30,000 has been offered for his capture, roughly equivalent to several million pounds today, enough to buy a sizable Highland estate several times over. Government patrols search every glen, every island, every fishing village. Anyone caught sheltering the prince risks imprisonment, financial ruin, or worse. Now picture the Isle of Skye on a stormy evening. Rain lashes the shoreline. Waves crash against dark rocks beneath a sky with almost no moonlight. Somewhere nearby, government ships continue their search. Inside a small Highland house, there are no grand speeches, no dramatic declarations, only a quiet decision made by ordinary people. Do we protect the fugitive, or do we save ourselves? The name of the man who made that decision has survived for nearly 300 years, carried by descendants scattered across continents, yet spoken in a whisper on the night it mattered most. He was not a king, nor a general, nor a man whose portrait hangs in any great gallery. He was a Highland farmer older than most of the men who had marched for the prince, and he lived on a small island off the west coast of Scotland where the wind never quite stops. The clan he belonged to was neither the largest in the Highlands nor the most powerful. But on one storm-lashed evening in 1746, with government ships searching the coast and a fugitive prince hidden in his care, this man made a choice that would echo down through centuries. That surname is McKinnon. According to long-established clan tradition and contemporary accounts, it was John McKinnon who helped Charles Edward Stewart during this desperate escape. The prince's successful journey through Skye depended on the courage of several individuals, including the famous Flora MacDonald, but the McKinnon clan also played a significant role. John McKinnon was later arrested and imprisoned in the Tower of London. Owing largely to his age, he was eventually released, but like many Jacobite families, the clan faced lasting financial and political consequences. Think for a moment about that choice. There was no guarantee the prince would ever reclaim the throne. No certainty that history would remember the names of those who helped him. Every practical reason suggested abandoning him to his fate, yet they chose loyalty over safety, knowing full well what that loyalty might cost. History often celebrates kings, queens, and generals. Far less frequently does it remember the ordinary families who quietly accepted extraordinary risks because honor mattered more than comfort. In many ways, that is the true story of the McKinnons. By the 19th century, changing economic conditions and the Highland Clearances encouraged many McKinnon families to leave Scotland altogether, Some settled in Nova Scotia, others in Ontario. Others crossed into the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. They carried very few possessions, but one thing they refused to leave behind was their surname. Centuries have now passed since those dramatic nights on Skye. The castles have weathered. The battlefields have fallen silent. The chiefs who once commanded thousands now survive only in old manuscripts and fading portraits. Yet the names remain. Perhaps that is the greatest surprise of all. The true legacy of Scotland's clans was never simply their victories or their defeats. It was the determination of ordinary mothers and fathers who continued telling their children where they came from, even after kingdoms disappeared. States were lost, languages declined, and families scattered across the world. Somewhere in the Highlands today, a ruined castle still bears the crest of one of these clans. Somewhere beneath weathered stone lies an ancestor whose greatest hope was simply that the next generation would survive. Empires rose and fell. Kings were crowned and deposed. Wars redrew maps. Entire communities were uprooted. Yet these names endured because ordinary people refused to let them disappear. Every time you introduce yourself, sign your name, or tell someone your family history, you carry forward a story that has already survived hundreds of years. If this documentary has helped you see your surname in a new light, we'd love to hear your story. Tell us your family name in the comments and share where your ancestors eventually settled. And if you enjoyed this journey, subscribe to UK Bloodlines, where every week we uncover the forgotten stories behind Britain's oldest surnames. Until next time, thank you for watching. And remember, your surname is far more than a name. It is one of history's last living connections between the people who came before us and the generations still to come.